Good afternoon. My name is Rich Lowers. I'm duly appointed to help manage the discussion with this panel. I've helped this esteemed panel put together a few slides. I am not a slide reader. If there's something on one of those slides that I either forget to go over, one of them will either flag me down, or I'm going to count on one of you guys to flag me down. If there's something that I say or that one of them says that either makes no sense to you or that it's an acronym or some crazy industrial speak that we use, let us know immediately, please. And like I said, truly, there's a $20 bill in the front row. If anybody wants to try and check it out, just let me know.
Hey, Rich, real quick before you get started, general housekeeping rules, please mute your cell phones. Feel free to ask questions, but since the session is being recorded, we request that you wait for either this handheld mic or the catch box to come your way. And for anyone who is tweeting this session, it is G062. So, Rich, take it away.
G062. Okay, I'm sending a tweet right now. So this discussion was really kind of initiated because of a conversation, well, at least I think it was, a conversation that I had with one of the panelists. And we tried to talk about how this magic of auto classification is emerging and you know, something in the industry that's coming forward. And Sandy slapped me on the side of the head and said, it's here. People are using it already. I know it's a euphemism, but you know, verbally she assaulted me, and really talked a lot about how organizations are actually implementing this and using events that are catastrophic, like e-discovery events or M&A events or things that are really traumatic to an organization, to begin to build something. So when we were talking about it, somehow or another this panel came up, and I was asked to kind of try to orchestrate a conversation around this. And the tagline I put in there, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, is because it's the very nature of these tools that they have variability, that they are not black and white. They can be taught black and white, but they are not by their very nature black and white. There was a slide deck circulating earlier, but this is my esteemed panel. Industry leaders, them all. How's that? You like that? We will also be available for discussion after this, not only because we think we're going to go over, but also because we're very interested to hear some feedback on this presentation. The way I tried to organize this first was to talk about projects. How do these things start? And I'll get up here. Actually, I'm kind of walking around on the floor here. Nobody can see me. How do these things start, right? How do organizations decide that they need to do these things? In the discussions that we had ahead of time, somebody had money. That truly was one of them. That a budget became available. They knew they had some problems. They keep hearing about technology and AI and auto classification and machine learning and all these great things. So they decided they wanted to try and do some work about it. The one that I see most often in the consulting work that I do is client obligations. I've helped firms fill out that 200 questionnaire from clients asking about how they manage information, about how they govern not only the data about the client, but the data the client gives them. And I think that the other thing that keeps coming up is firms are changing. They have to change. In fact, it's one of the oldest industries that hasn't gone through a traumatic change yet, except for the accounting firm that just bought a law firm, right? Wasn't that a dramatic change? So that certainly is one of the impetuses, and I think also just standard kind of trying to get better. What's the first thing that organizations need to do? Scope it. Put some runway markers around what you want to do. And unless I'm mistaken, I believe this deck is available for download later on the app and stuff like that, right?
It will be available after this session.
Yeah, thank you. And it's not really that dramatic, but it is pretty good. Identify the scope and scale of the project, right? Try to get really good idea of what you want to do, or get a really good idea of what you want to try or what you want to learn. Some of the upfront decision making that I think is critical, and that I think we talked about as a panel that was really critical, is choose a project that can scale. I think the analogy was not something so big it would cause imminent failure of the whole law firm, but not something so small that nobody would care, right? Make sure that it's something that can kind of scale. If it's so niche-y that even if you were successful at it, no one would ever care, that's bad, right? But if it's big enough where it could make an impact, that people would have at least some sort of a aha moment as they kind of looked at your learnings and what you're doing, that would be great. And that if potentially choose the taxonomy, that was one of the things that I put in there. Have a piece of data that has the ability to tell you something, either tell you something kind of about the firm or tell you something about a process within the firm or a process within your organization. And for those organizations that can't do any of those things, just look at your data. One of the stories that Sandy and I had discussed earlier was that sometimes doing an analysis of the data reveals in itself either the problem or the potentiality of risk or whatever that may be, and it gives you something then to kind of say, hey, we did some analysis on this little piece of the G drive, and this is kind of what it looks like. That's kind of what we thought, but here's a couple of outliers that we didn't think about. Or here's a couple of things that we found that are related to personal health information. We immediately need to act on those, right? So sometimes letting the data drive the project. Does that kind of make sense? And I think Rich is first up that's going to talk a little bit about an organization that initiated their first project.
The first victim. Can you hear my...
First victim, you have to
Everyone
speak
hear
up. There we go.
My speech okay? Good. Okay, so I'm English, so it's worth just sort of saying where I come from in this whole setup. I was in the Air Force. I'm an aircraft engineer originally, so what am I doing here? Frankly, I was the guy who cared about our data in the Air Force, and I inflicted a SharePoint migration on our global user base. Most people must have had a migration inflicted on them at some point before. And I guess in answer to the question, or the sort of rhetorical question you posed earlier on, Rich, if someone has to care, or have a reason to care, to get these projects kicked off. And in my experience, it's either personality-driven, which in my case it was. You need someone who just cares enough, is going to overcome all the organizational barriers and the change, and get the budget together and bring people together and actually get stuck in. Data in motion is another good thing to make people care. And in my case, again, it was a data in motion situation. We had to do something with the information, and what we're going to do about it. And an event as well, a legal event or regulatory event, are the three things that in my experience generally cause people to care. For this particular case study, I think we talked about how do we get started and why has one of our customers got started with engaging in the auto classification space. The customer in question here is an oil and gas industry customer, and they'd established a knowledge management team. I think there's an interesting thing. I mean, it's always useful to know any people in the audience. Does anyone have knowledge management teams apart from these guys? I don't know.
So in the 90s, I did.
Yeah, I mean, is it a trendy term anymore? I think it's kind of outmoded, but I think, Sandy, you made the point earlier on that actually you still need this stuff because there's value in the data, and whatever you call it, you need people who are able to sort of manage or add that value to the business. So in this case, an oil and gas company. If you hit the next slide, please, Rich. If I touch my nose, I'm sure you'll pick it up. So
we worked out a signal, but he is English. So the first thing he said is, instead of a signal, can I just say, can you push the next slide, please?
Yeah,
that's fine.
Try and keep things straight.
No signal. Yeah.
So as I said, these guys had data in motion. So two of the three things that I just spoke about. They had somebody who cared. So this knowledge management team, this mystical knowledge management team. Interestingly, I think the good percentage of these guys, and there are only 2 or 3 of them, so let's not consider this and be an enormous team. I think a good number of these guys are actually contractors, but they're long-term established in the business. And they had a data in motion type problem. At least they had a repository, and I won't name the repository, which was getting difficult to support, was getting too costly to support. And so they had this burning platform, which meant they wanted to move their data. And I get one of the big questions that always comes in these situations is, why don't I just leave the data put? Why don't I just slap a read-only label on the repository and walk away or blow it up or whatever? But in this case, the business owner of the data was the person owning this burning platform, and they desperately wanted valuable data taken forward. And so we've got up on the screen here, what were their objectives? What were they trying to achieve? Well, ultimately, they wanted to get the data across. But I think the key thing here was because they had a knowledge management team, they were going to take a chance and really try and add value to the data in progress as well. And that's where order classification comes in. That's where our technology came in. And the first word on the board here is discover. When I first encountered this space, the reason I cared is because I just didn't know what was out there. And it doesn't matter who says they do. You don't know what's out in your repositories. You really don't. Unless you can find the record manager or support professional who's been in the business for 30 years and hasn't moved. No one knows all the data. So they wanted to discover what was out there, and that was their key first thing. What do we have, how big, and how long is it going to take to move, how much is it going to cost? They wanted to identify where they could items of value, and conversely, they wanted to get rid of trash as well. And the old metaphor really is you wouldn't buy a new Ferrari and then move all of your old coffee cups and trash from your old car to your new. And why would you do that with a repository too? And so they deployed our software. They had the knowledge management tools in place, the team in place, and they set out on this journey. The first barrier they hit, of course, was understanding their data, their context. I think, and Jan and you guys might say different later on, but to my mind, you can't do any of this without context. What's the general context I'm working in? Auto classification isn't going to answer every single question you have. So the business owner, in this case, owning drawing data and similar type data for the oil and gas industry, provided that context, and they were able to deploy the software and achieve a couple of things. First of all, take away trash, and as I mentioned earlier on, migrating data is costly, and so actually reducing the file count, the document count, was a valuable thing for the business. And secondly, they had a master metadata source which described what the business was. So Rich, you said the taxonomy. What's the taxonomy? They had this set out. It was a valuable space. They defined what their data looked like, or at least what valuable things look like. And so they were able to line up their master metadata taxonomy, what in this case, a mining asset, some sort of piece of equipment or something like that, and match that up with the unstructured, messy data that was in this old repository, and use that to add value to the corpus. So reducing the count, adding metadata, document typing, so that when it was migrated into the new repository, in this case SharePoint, I think, the whole corpus, A, cost less to move, B, was better understood, and C, had value added to it through the classic tagging. A couple
of things that Rich said that as an information governance guy that come immediately to top of mind, and one is the very nature of the data that he has, yes, has value, but it only has value if you know what it is, right? The maintenance records for a particular piece of equipment only has value if you can show your regulator that you've maintained the equipment. In the event of a problem, you could say, this is what happened. The information has a great deal of regulatory burden associated to it. That industry is by far one of the most costly from an injury perspective, and being able to have all that information available when challenged and be able to show the authority and chain of custody of it is a critical piece. You could do the dump and run from a legacy system to SharePoint, but that doesn't allow you to do the due diligence necessary to really show the authority of that information. And in fact, here's the maintenance record. Now, don't worry about all this other stuff. We got rid of it. Here was our rules, why we got rid of it. This is the one that shows exactly what happened. That's key. That's absolutely key. May I advance the...
You may, sir. Otherwise, I'll keep talking forever. One of the sad things about this job is you get excited about it. I just threw this up to illustrate where the team got to. They developed an approach. You don't need to be able to read the text here. What you need to see is there's a process which they defined and owned. And what was really interesting is they resold it across their business. So they started off with this decommissioning job, but at the last time we're chatting to them, they have 50 different applications of the technology or the service or the capability for different types of information data in motion challenges. So examples will be data platform, so oil platform decommission, oil platform acquisition. So acquisitions and mergers when you're bringing in new data or getting rid of data. Migrations, legal events, legal discoveries, legal hold, using the technology in all those circumstances. And they established the knowledge management capability, and now reselling it across the business for business as usual. And I think, Sandy, you'll talk a little bit more about that later on. This is not just for Christmas. This is for life. Every time there's a business change, a regulatory change, a context change in the organization, you're creating new legacy data, which needs to be dealt with using these sorts of
Key
approaches.
part I liked about this one. Oh, go ahead.
Question. One thing we didn't really cover in the discussions, but it might be interesting. What is the profile of the user or the operator of the software? Because that's a question we typically get from the audience as well.
Yeah, the question was, Jan was saying, what's the profile of the actual business user for this data and for this system? Hello? Better?
Hello?
There you go.
Yeah, you
Got
just
it.
have a deep
Got it.
voice.
While we're at it, okay.
So yeah, I think that's a question we always get. So maybe we,
I mean, there's a reason why not every organization, in fact, most organizations don't have these people inside. My experience is the first person who walked past the door when the project starts. And that's happened. I've seen that happen plenty of times. In this case, it was a contractor bringing in some specialism outside. And generally for me, it's most important that they have they care about data and they're willing to ask questions. And dare I say it, if they're record managers, they've shed the desire for 100% perfect as well. Those are the characteristics for me. They need to get excited about a picture of their data. I think that to me is the key thing, Jan.
And there's also some technical complexity or some technical know-how on using these type of products, but it's also not something that you have to be an IT guru to be able to operate. I mean, that's also the point.
That's correct.
You have to know a bit about statistics. I mean, at least get those concepts, because we will talk about accuracy and recall, and they're very explainable concepts. But you need to somebody who at least understands and appreciates these type of things. And then there's the rules, and I guess machine learning has. When we try to simplify it in our products to an extent that it is usable.
Well, let's get into some of the best practices that came out of that discussion. One is understanding that this first time that is sometimes discovery. You are learning about your data. You are learning about how your organization either creates it, how they manage it, how they desire to manage it, how many people will actually stand up and say, I'm the data owner, and who won't say who's the data owner, even though they are. The things that you learn about it, you talked immediately about being able to move it off of a platform and put it into a source of authority, knowing what you have and being able to apply the security for that. There are a million other sessions here talking about information security, and a 15-year-old that just made everybody nervous about it. It's critical. It's absolutely critical that when you're going to make the effort to touch this data, you do something about it to protect it. And really understand that they had some clear rules about what they wanted to do, how they wanted to manage the data. Those three fundamentals are key when you're initiating a project to really ensure that it's a little bit more successful.
Before we move on, can I just get a show of hands? How many of you are here as part of a law firm? Your employer's a law firm. And how many of you are something other than that? Okay, because one of the things that I will point out to you, since the majority was law firm, is that you have, when you're talking about data analysis, you actually have two groups that you're ultimately going to have to keep happy. That is the clients and the folks in the law firm, your partners and folks like that. So you kind of have two sets of politics at play. There's the client data and all that usually goes with that if you're going to be analyzing client data or case data or work product. But internally, you also have the politics of essentially looking in the work product that people have produced. And that can sometimes make for a very political football because what auto classification does at the end of the day is kind of lay bare exactly what that content is. So just the act of looking at it can sometimes bring out other issues. Are you looking at email? Then you're looking at communications. Are you looking at billing? Then you might be looking at, compliance. So there are different kind of subtexts that are out there that when you're considering taking on an application or a project, you should know going in that you're going to want to have some heavy hitters to help you navigate that in case something does.
The non-technical issues,
Yeah.
This slide we put up particularly to talk about the rule-driven approach versus the data-driven approach. And data-driven meaning machine learning, as Jan and I were talking earlier. It's important to understand that when you start to talk about these things, that there are these two camps. We'll go into another example that's a little bit more of a data-driven approach, but understanding that when these two things come up, that you're kind of talking about two different methodologies for your project, or two different ways that you're going to approach looking at the data. And Jan, I'm going to have you kind of talk about one of the data-driven ones in particular.
So I picked a completely different, because we're talking about a capability,
yes,
which is auto-classification. It's not a product or a specific domain that we want to talk about applying it. So I took the auto-classification capability that we have, and we applied it in a completely different set than, I guess, some of the other case studies, because we looked at the time card entries, so time entries in the time tracking system, and used auto-classification on that data, which is very different than document data. However, the same capability can be used to do meaningful things there as well. Could you move it? So actually, just to set you the challenge of, and this was for a law firm, so I think it's something that might speak to a lot of you, is so the challenge that they were facing was there was a demand from, or a project started from the finance director to do an investigation of the cost and profits on matters. So where are we losing money, where do we have a very good profit margin, and not just on the entire matter level, but on the specific tasks that are carried out throughout the life cycle of a matter. And the best data to turn towards to do this analysis are time card entries, so the entries in the time tracking system. However, what they found out is that matters that they had a lot of matters in the aviation industry, and that Afghanistan was a very, very popular region in terms of where they conducted matters.
He has a very mild sense of humor. So it took me a while to figure out that both Afghanistan and aviation were the first two choices in the time card entry system.
Yeah.
So every matter where somebody didn't care what something was classified, they classified it as Afghanistan aviation. And I found that just absolutely not only a great story that was steal, but just amazing to hear.
You should definitely steal it. But it is the big blocker on doing the analysis. You want to do a financial analysis that's essentially a business intelligence type of exercise. You cannot do business intelligence if you don't have structured data. You need structured, correct data. So that was the challenge. It's not so much the region that was important, but actually the type of work that the lawyer were doing. And weirdly enough, they find it seems to be easier to write a narrative that actually makes sense than to pick the actual task from the menu. Whatever that is, that needs to be fixed at some point in time card tracking systems. But so what we were given is, can you actually put the right task code on our entries? And if we have that, then we can do a detailed analysis. So the approach of this is, rather than trying to figure out rules based on the couple of words or the other metadata that are in these entries, we took the machine learning approach, which is also, I guess, our strong capability. So, and the idea was, can we teach on some of the entries? With some I mean several thousands. If we take some of these where the tagging was done correctly, can we use that as data to teach a machine to put the right code on all the ones where it wasn't put correctly or where it wasn't put at all? And again, the same type of I think pattern can be seen. There's a business owner, in this case it's finance, and the data owner was a bit seen as the IT department, even though it should probably also be finance. There's the challenge which is there, the data which is there, and they clearly identified what the data was. They had in our case, data which was already correctly tagged and data which was untagged, so we have these two camps. With the tag data, we take it and we take a subset, so we start small, don't start doing this for millions of records in one go, just let's take 100,000 entries and prove the concept on that, demonstrate that it's going to work, and then take it to the bigger volume. So 50, 100,000 records, I think, or something, about 20% of them tagged, and the challenge, can we tag the other 80%? And it worked well. Again, it's not perfect. These systems, by the way, can automatically benchmark themselves, because they use part of the correctly tagged data to figure out how well they're doing. So you get objective scores from these type of systems back, and I tell you, what the accuracy, all these type of statistical numbers are about it. And I think, I don't know what the exact accuracy numbers were, but they were somewhere between 80 and 90%, which is not perfect if you would use those task codes to actually submit the billing to the client, but it's perfect if you do bulk BI intelligence analysis. So again, something that we started off doing as a capability applied to a specific business case, and that now we turn into a product that can be used and operated again by either a bit of a tech-savvy person or even somebody who has very little technical skills.
The part I really liked about Jan's story was, number one, it was something that was firm critical, right? Time cards. By far one of the most important things for a profitable law firm, right? The other thing that I liked about it is it used the very nature of having empirical data to fill the gap for those time card entries that didn't have empirical data, that didn't have metadata that was valid, and in fact used the learnings from those time card entries that were appropriately tagged as a means for establishing what the guidelines should be for investigating the other ones. The other thing I really liked about it is that it actually had a profit motive, right? Being actually able to drive the organization to accept the idea that machines are going to look at time card data, machines are going to evaluate it, determine a weighting for it, establish profitability of certain tasks or certain lines of work. I can't think of anything more critical in a firm other than money as far as importance. But also I like the story about how it started out small and then scaled. By looking at a small subset of the entries, you were able to then apply all those learnings to millions of time card entries. And I know there are firms that have those old legacy systems of time card systems that are still chugging along today with all that data, yet no clear visibility into that data.
It's very important, though, that there was we didn't do this just for the sake of doing it, and that's, I think, the story for all of us. There was a clear business driver, and
owner.
An owner. And you have to start thinking in what is the problem that I want to solve, and not what is the technology that I would like to, apply. This is just a tool in this world. The outcome was the BI report. That was the real thing that mattered. Yeah.
There's been a couple of really good stories to start with. Any questions from the audience at all as far as any one of these at this point? No? So a couple of things that are non-technical issues. Number one, and both Rich and Jan kind of talked about this, and that is user adoption. The first case, I think, had a great idea for user adoption, but a very small user group initially, and that demonstrating that skill set within the organization is really what generated more users for the migration service or the classification service. The other thing is that automation can be uneasy, right? The idea that an organization decides they're going to use something to look at the data, and to Sandy's point, to lay it bare or to strip out a lot of the things that are not data related as a part of that, that's hard. Okay, it's hard because it's people, it's change management. And in fact, I would contend that for all of these projects, people and change management is a significant part of that, if not more than half of it, is getting organizations comfortable with these things, and making sure they feel comfortable not only with what the capability set will do, but the benefits of that, right? The other thing I liked about Jan's story and Rich's too was, what does good look like, right? You mentioned an accuracy rate of 80s or maybe a little closer to a 90. As an information governance guy, a former records management guy, that would be appalling. Oh my God, I can't believe you didn't get closer to 95. But as a math guy, I know that humans stink at categorizing content. And in fact, they are not only unreliable, but they are in some cases just straight out liars and will just dump and run when it comes to having to put information metadata together. That is achievable. I can make a decision with 80% or 90% accuracy quite easily, in fact.
It also depends on the context. If you're dealing in a risk context or in a litigation context, your expectations of what the system should perform like can be completely different, or you put higher bars.
Right, a much higher bar in some cases. Yeah, exactly. The other thing I liked about it is that the benefits of the process or the technology to the organization are immediately broadcast and known, right? Finance has a very clear idea about profitability of certain processes and actions. the oil and gas industry, they have a really good idea of how they can get off of their burning platform. Well, I guess I shouldn't say burning platform.
No,
for that industry, of that legacy document management system, and be able to take advantage of more modern technology and be able to do that. Again, those benefits are immediately known. One of the things that organizations need to do once they've got those successes is kind of ingrain that technology in the organization. Sandy has an example of an organization, or what the perfect organization would look like when it comes to that.
So, am I on?
You are.
Okay.
You are.
So you've heard about a couple of kind of initial drivers. There's a bunch. It might be a migration issue, some sort of archive, or maybe you're moving data to the cloud. It might be an M&A where an organization is essentially inheriting data from another organization. I think it was Rich mentioned data in motion. We say data in flight. You may have, for law firms, you may be accepting laterals or laterals are departing. So data is moving around. Or it might be something more regulatory like GDPR or some sort of data privacy regulation that is essentially demanding that the data be analyzed for some reason or other. So whatever it is that's sort of leading the charge, that's probably going to get the team together, outline what the first set of data to be analyzed, pull the budget together, and that's going to get the initial thing kind of out of the gate. So you definitely want to watch for that kind of project and use case. But one of the things to recognize, and you can go ahead now, Rich, is that analysis is relatively cheap. As long as you're in there analyzing content for one purpose, you might as well be analyzing it for lots of purposes at the same time. And I kind of liken that process to like a DNA test or a blood test. When you go into the doctor and they do a blood test for whatever, you wind up getting tested for 15 things anyway. It's just faster and easier. And then if there's some other issue, they can bring that forward. So what happens now is that you can kind of combine use cases. They happen concurrently. That allows different groups to participate and share in the expense of the tool and to have more kind of recipients of the value. So what you get is this kind of network effect of the value of the technology, of the people using it, and the data applications essentially across the enterprise instead of department by department or use case by use case. All of that, the kind of turn of phrase that we like is data under management. And the idea is that you're not just going through data once for one purpose, but you are bringing the data into the fold so that it can be managed over time. What are some things that might change over time? If you are evaluating or your client is evaluating content that should be under legal hold, eventually legal holds end. The case settles or that person is no longer applicable to the matter, whatever it may be. So data comes off of legal hold. Now what? How does it get reintegrated back in? Especially when many organizations now are operating under a retention schedule. How long we're going to keep different kinds of data. Think about this. Two big points to what I just said. How long, that's a time element. So time is progressing over the life cycle of that data. And how long are we going to keep different kinds of data? So you need to be able to understand what are the different kinds of data that you have. You're going to treat a contract differently than a Christmas card, okay? Even though both might be a PDF attachment to an email. And so it's important to start taking the bigger picture. You can tell a little bit, I come from an e-discovery background where we're analyzing things like attachments, but there's an e-discovery mentality here if you think about it beyond any particular matter. Same idea, just like clients are trying to get into data under management for discovery, you have the same thing happening now for information governance. And in fact, the client that, the business case that I'm talking about there also happened to be oil and energy, essentially inherited about 120 terabytes of data from a recent M&A. They inherited the data and the business and laid off the staff. And so all the institutional knowledge about that data had left the building. What do you do with that? So this was a combination of M&A driven and what needed to be under legal hold given the new combined entity. And so auto classification was used to identify content that needed to be under legal hold, which legal hold, in other words, which matters, which custodians, and then kind of isolated and protected from potential destruction from a retention policy. So there were two elements to that. And in the process of that, of course, you know, it was this year. So in May, GDPR came out, and all of a sudden the request was, oh, wait, what about stuff that's either not under legal hold, but you're going to have three buckets. You're going to have legal hold, hang on to this. You're going to have, this is rot. Everybody know redundant, obsolete, trivial? Rot in junk. And this is going to go off, you know, hopefully, and be deleted. Then there's the smushy middle ground. And that needs to be under retention, which means you're going to deal with things like time. What is it? What data security? Is there PII in there? All that middle smushy ground, and anything coming off a legal hold goes into the middle smushy. So you need a kind of ongoing approach to deal with what probably is the bulk of the data. And so what we found working with this client was, even though legal hold and M&A had kind of kicked it off, we wound up inheriting all the data that was not either legal hold or rot, and we moved from department to department till, at this point, there's probably several petabytes under management and being kind of routinely assessed for whatever the topics of the day are. So one of the things you want to look for as you move forward is, can these solutions adapt? Do they have rules engines or regex or other things that will let you change the parameters of what the classifications are, because your world is going to change over time?
What would that look like?
Yeah, there you go. A number of products, ours is one of them, that gives you kind of a dashboard view of data. So once you've analyzed it, this is sort of, you know, kind of data visualization 101, kind of presenting up in a fashion that lets someone, whoever's in charge of this, make easy slices and dices of data and then easy decisioning about how to handle that. So far, we've mostly talked about auto classification as tagging. In other words, adding tags to data. What is this? Who needs it? Who should have access? What does it say? We haven't talked that much about disposition. That's the go-forward piece. So tagging you can think of as, what is this? And disposition is, what do I do with it? And that is the one that's a moving target. There's
Right.
What do I do with it now?
Right. Well,
And later. Go ahead.
that's the biggest thing out of all three examples that if you're going to take away, and that is actionable. Once you have that visibility to the data, make sure that it's in a position where it's actionable. You either have established business rules for understanding what you intend to do with it once you find the things you're looking for. When you talk about actionable, truly the ability to delete, you will find junk. You will find junk that's clearly junk, that is understood as junk, that everybody agrees is junk, yet nobody could agree on deleting it. Make sure that you have some accountability or somebody that can at least own that. And in some cases, you know, at least what I would recommend, decide on the rules. Make the decisions on the rules. Don't make the decisions at the document level. We talked about this a little bit. Mm-hmm. When you try to go through a list of 100 terabytes of data, you can't go through it in the context of documents. You have to go through it in the context of rules. You have to go through it in the context of understanding what your obligations are and what you've decided already you're going to do with those things that fit one of the three buckets or that fit the context of what you're trying to do with the data. These dashboards, they are beautiful, absolutely beautiful. They visually are astounding, but truly what they allow you to do more than anything is make decisions. Allows you to make smart decisions that are clearly documented, that have a reasonable expectation of accuracy, and that demonstrate that you're clearly abiding by your legal and regulatory obligations when you make those decisions. That's, I think, the key part of these dashboard views, at least in my opinion, because that actionability, you know, if somebody gives you a list of 80,000 spreadsheets that you can delete, they're going to kill you. You know, that's not actionable. Sorry, I jumped on your slide.
Just something I've been asking at all the venues and things that I've been speaking at lately, is anyone in the room responsible for their organization for signing off that your organization is in compliance with your InfoGov policies? Is that anybody's job? Yeah, there's a
We got
couple.
1, 2.
How are you feeling about that? You real comfortable signing your name lately?
I'm okay signing my name. I just got a directive that I have to send that to staff that are below me, and I'm
Yeah.
Her comment was, I'm completely comfortable with signing my name, but we also have to hold accountable the team that works for me, and that's a little less comfortable. I agree with you completely. I can sign my name to anything. My name's not worth very much. But my team, holds me accountable for their things. I agree. Yeah, that's a very good question. I know nobody ever says yes. I love signing that.
Yeah, I love it. I'm totally, my organization's in compliance, top to bottom.
So what happened next at that organization? Well, the context that Sandy was talking about was an organization that really took the next step in maturity and started to talk about data under management. Can you kind of describe what that kind of looked like?
Sure. So what happened was essentially to go from an initial auto classification analysis to kind of set a baseline and an immediate triage of what needed to go where. So what immediately needed to be protected under legal hold, what immediately could be wiped out as rot. And by the way, for those of you that are looking to have an ROI, a way to sell this to the managing partners or something like that, usually removing rot is enough of an ROI right there. Typically, you can assume 30 to 40% of your content is rot, which means it can kind of come off the table. You are currently one way or another paying to store that. Either it's on your own hardware or it's out in the cloud, and that's pretty expensive. That, I can guarantee, would probably, just the removal of that, would pay for all 3 of our solutions. Okay, so it's an easy ROI if you're looking for it. And it worked very well for this client in particular. It's also a nice way to get IT on board. If you're looking to kind of win favors with IT for a project like this, that's the ticket. So we had all of those things, and once that first baseline of analysis was complete, the legal hold went off to legal hold, the rot was removed, and then the middle ground, it's actually active now, was rules were edited to account for retention. So retention by document type, by record type, by date, by custodian, and by access, like most recent access. So those become parameters. You've heard us talk a little bit about rules or rules engines. Just briefly what that is, you can think of them like kind of like if-then statements. If XYZ condition occurs, then take this action. So that's how disposition rules tend to work. If it's a contract and 10 years has passed and blah, 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 then go ahead and maybe sequester it, maybe delete it, maybe put it up for evaluation, whatever. There's myriad steps you can take after that, and that is the state of this client's data now. It's more in that kind of like maintenance mode where that's going to be for at least the next 5 years, because that's what they opted for.
Well, and the key part that I liked about that was a discussion, again, about the rules. Being able to get your organization into a position where they're actually discussing and approving rules related to the behaviors of what you're going to do, as opposed to the list of documents. And congratulations, the winner of the first $20 bill for a question is?
Hi, Teresa Britton with Exelon Corporation.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi. So we have definitely been looking at this really closely, the auto classification, for a couple of use cases. Have actually talked to some of the folks on the panel. A few years now we've been in talks. But what we come back to a lot are the rules. So the rules that you're talking about. What did you use to develop those? So for legal hold, it seems like that would be pretty simple, right? You know sort of what is in litigation or under some sort of regulatory proceeding. It's pretty well defined. But when you get into some other parts of like the retention and records and other things that you might want to auto-classify, the rules can become a little bit more broad or unknown. How do you go about, or what did you use to develop the rules that you then continued to develop under this data management?
Sure, I'm assuming that was to me. Usually we will start, I was going to say, we start from the point of view of if there's a given retention policy. Most folks have either done a data map or a first round retention policy They can be a little bit vague, and they can be a little bit crisscrossed. So for, like, if you take something like a resume, is a resume, if it's not someone that you wound up hiring, then it's kind of just a document. If it is someone you've hired, then it becomes part of their personnel record. So that's an interesting kind of gray area.
Right, and if it's a citizen from the EU, from the Netherlands,
then it's even,
you have 72 hours to dispose of
exactly.
it.
Yeah. So one of the key elements there is document type, resume. So being able to marry the document type against the record type, because most retention policies are written by record type, like employee record. Okay, that is everything from your W-2 form to your resume to whatever else. So having these, different classifications on the data is one way that lets you slice and dice so that your rules can be very refined. The other, so one approach is to start with the retention policy. The other way, quite honestly, is from know-how. At least we have been in this business for 18 years, so we kind of have an idea of what to look for, and there's some expertise, either, and if it doesn't come from the vendor, then from a consultant, to help kind of guide those efforts. You're going to think about HR data differently than you're going to think about accounting data. And there are sort of rules of thumb or maybe even battle scars that come from that. So that's maybe not the best answer, but it's the honest answer about how some of this gets done.
I think it's really important you're honest at this point, though, isn't it? I'm with you totally. And the other thing I think I'd add is let the data feed the rules. So ultimately what you're doing is you're mapping the data you actually have with the retention policy or the record class rather than the data you think you have. And if I'd say what changes the game with technologies that do this work is that they tell you what you've actually got. And I lose track of the number of times our services people come in going, oh yeah, they were waving their arms about all these classes and these things they needed, and then we showed them this big pile of stuff they hadn't even thought of. And so engaging with your data visually and understanding what you have lets you begin to answer those questions with some degree of confidence, whereas previously you were just guessing, frankly.
Well, and also as a governance guy, I would recommend that for your particular industry, you have a significant advantage in that the nomenclature and taxonomy of your industry is well established not only by your regulators and how they ask you for stuff, but just by the industry as a whole. And marrying that kind of industry taxonomy with some of the learning capabilities of these tool sets is a tremendous advantage.
Can I add one more thing, which is that everyone should know this. This is an iterative process. You don't just run it once and step away. There's refinement and tweaking, and because of that, sometimes you can use that to your advantage. So the ones that are sort of a slam dunk out of the gate, yep, we got it, we're confident, everything's great, they can be classified and then kind of moved off the table so that you can kind of hone in and in and in for the more problematic or difficult document types. So if in the course of doing the iterations, you can you generally take the bulk of it away and then get really clever to deal with the weird stuff that gets left over.
I think just, if I may, again, one more time, and if you don't move quickly or the longer you wait, I always think of information as having a half-life. It's like a decay. And, the chances of you being able to do as good a job in a year's time as you could today is decaying away at some arbitrary rate that we could probably talk about for ages, but it's certainly going away fast. And so, however long it takes to get going, know that if you start now, you're going to do a better job than if you start in a year's time. Well, and you're going to have to do it at some point.
One of you could validate this, but one of the concepts that I've talked about with clients is taking the easy content and classifying it, the content that somebody's either touching today or creating today, because those answers can then inform when you're doing legacy reviews of content, because very few organizations change that dramatically over time. So if I make a good classification or categorization decision today on a set of documents, I can use that same learning capability on my legacy that I created 10 years ago or that I created 5 years ago.
That actually works both directions.
Right, yeah.
If for some reason people, and a lot of folks will want to start with the legacy data because it's not in active use and you're not kind of moving anybody's cheese. So if you start with the legacy data and you kind of build the profile for the organization, you can roll it forward. It's almost the complete opposite, but I've seen both techniques. I
got to tell you, we're about 10 minutes out, I think. We've had discussions offline and again today And these panel members have a lot of stories, a lot of very good examples on how to solve data classification problems, on how to solve or take advantage of some of the capabilities of these tools. If you get an opportunity, come on and talk to them, ask them about their stories. Outside of the fact that they're actually software vendors, they're actually really, really intelligent and smart people, and they really are able to give a lot of insight onto techniques and capability sets that exist in the marketplace, not just necessarily with their particular product, on addressing particular problems. I think Jan's Timecard entry one is by far, I think, the most innovative one that I really like from a law firm perspective because of the very nature of it, and to Sandy and I's discussion early, kind of the sensitivity of it, but not the sensitivity of it, how it can reveal lots of things that are really important, but that people get a little wonky about, when looking at it. So I think that's really key. Do we want to keep going for questions? Did somebody else? Was there one over here? I'm sorry. No? Okay.
I think also, like, more and more,
Go ahead,
you should start expecting that from the vendor ecosystem to have these capabilities built into the platforms, into the tooling. Because there's a lot of talk about
Yeah, we had
AI.
that conversation. Jan was talking about how the capability sets that these companies that they're representing have are starting to become something you should expect from your content manager provider. Because in fact, while you're creating this content and the tools you're using to create it, the tools you're using to store it, the tools you're using to distribute it, they should be doing this exact same thing, if not taking advantage of these tools and integrating with them very tightly in order for this to happen. The velocity of information is never going to get any slower, and the volume of it is never going to get any less. It's critical to put these things into the early part of information creation and storage and retention, because it's not going to get any easier. To your point earlier, Rich, it never gets easier. It always gets harder over time.
Can you go ahead? I think it's the next slide. Yeah.
Oh, hey, there we go.
So, one of the things that's kind of playing out right now is where should the data be and how should we manage it? Should it be one giant, enterprise content management or a DMS? Should we have multiple? Like it or not, this is kind of the current state of affairs. We're a little bit all over the map. And so you guys have a kind of a decision in front of you. Do you want to treat these independently? Do you want to kind of corral them together? If you're fans of the term coined by Gartner, which is called content services, you'll recognize that here. What they mean by that is essentially an intelligence layer between the data as it's stored and the data as it's used. So data might be stored in Exchange or in Office 365 or in OneDrive or even on your hard drive. But if you are trying to use some kind of application that cuts across, like I'm an EU citizen, where's all my PII? You're going to need to go across them. So you're going to need that intelligence layer, which is by and large auto classification, to be in between the storage and the use case if you want to cover all of them.
Any other questions? So a couple of things that I wanted to kind of close the conversation with, and that was some of the learnings in getting a chance to talk with my esteemed colleagues about this subject. One is try to find things that are easy to do when you are exercising these projects. The first project you do should not be analyzing all the content of all the senior partners within your firm to make sure they did it right. That's not a model for success. There's way too much non-technical baggage with things like that, right? The other thing that I really like is finding a champion. The reason that we're in these industries is because of our passion. There's somebody in your organization that has that passion. It might be you. It's okay to be your own champion, right? To be, what's the phrase? I'm my own biggest fan, right? I've got to be the one person supporting this more than anybody else because it's something that I'm passionate about, that I'm going to advocate for. The other thing that Sandy really mentioned, and that is critical, because finance always looks at these projects, find where your return on investment is, whether that is a reduction in risk for the firm due to regulatory or compliance issues or other mandates by clients, right? or what is your actual dollar amount that you could possibly save by retiring a legacy system or by getting rid of duplicate data or anything like that. The other thing that I would that hasn't really come up, but that certainly is a key part of it, we're not just talking about unstructured data. Jan's example of highly structured data and being able to analyze that and turn it into something valuable, or at least put it in a position of being able to dispose of it. Organizations do that today. The legacy SAP systems you installed in the 90s, guess what? They are able to be managed out when it comes to data, as hard as it may be, and these tools have the ability to do those things. And the other one was the start small and improve over time. To Rich's point, time isn't your friend when trying to classify. However, it is a way that you can develop that skill set within your organization to really put it as a center of excellence for not only for you to be able to do what you need to do to help the firm, but also to be able to help the firm do things for customers or for clients that they couldn't do before. And that was our presentation today. Does anybody have any questions? Like I said, we're available up here. You're more than welcome to come up and talk to us, and thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference.